he's not in one of those situations where he was over sentenced because he didn't have the proper funds to get proper representation, and he did things to make things harder for himself. Why would you pick up that case? Before we dive into this episode, I wanted to take a moment and personally thank all of our membership group. You might have noticed that recently the Long Beach Post launched a paywall. Now, the Word podcast will never end up behind that paywall, but it still takes finances to produce this show, give you great coverage of crime, politics, the homeless issue, and so much more. Without you, we simply could not do that. So I want to say thank you to our newest Premier members. Now, our Premier membership is $25 per month unless you pay that annually, and you get a 20% discount. So without further ado, let me say thank you to Kevin Scott, Casey Reed Fisher, Stephen Vopava, Marguerite Walker, Daniel Duran, Gwen Richardson, Daniel Williams, Peter Joseph Rosenwald, Chris Ann Blankenship, Chris Reagan, James Rex Winkle, Nan Richardson, Dr. Karen Seaman McBride, and Joel Lube. Once again, I want to say thank you to our newest Premier members, but you too can still become a member by going to lbpost.com and joining for as little as $8 per month. And thank you to all of you who understand the value and continue to support local journalism. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the attorneys that are handling the appeal for Tory Lanez. So you think the Democratic Party cares about Black people? Believe it or not, Rex, I think that tweet is part of the problem. Do you feel like we could have addressed this homeless issue much sooner? You have to speak a word, make it a good one.
Okay, let's go.
Welcome back to The Word. Once again, I'm Jackie Ray. I am excited to have my guest on the show right now. For a lot of us, we've been following this case for a long time. If you've been following the Word podcast for a while, you remember not too long in the distant past, I went to Unite the People because Tory Lanez was coming and he was donating, I believe it was $50,000 to make sure that people had an opportunity, especially if they didn't have proper legal representation, to have their cases revisited or maybe their sentences reduced. So he donated to that cause because he understands that sometimes, especially for people who don't have the financial prowess, the justice system doesn't work that well for those people. So we met Tory Lanez on this show through Unite the People. And then also we know about Tory Lanez's legal situation. So if you don't know, somehow, he was charged with 1 count of assault with a semi-automatic firearm and carrying a loaded unregistered firearm in a vehicle. And that was resulting from the case of him allegedly shooting Megan Thee Stallion. A lot of twists and turns happened in that case since then, but ultimately he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and he is currently serving that sentence right now. His attorneys are with me now who are fighting for his appeal. I'm excited to have you both here. I'm going to start with you, Crystal. This is Crystal Morgan. She's the lead attorney on the case, but you also work with Unite the People, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you're their lead attorney?
Yes, ma'am.
Here's a fun fact about her, though, before we dive into this. She also lives in Colorado Springs.
Yes.
So how are you navigating this Colorado Springs, Long Beach back and forth?
I love it because, you know, I get to spend time with my family in the mountains, and then I have to come on what I call my workcations. And I go on workcation every month, and I get to come to the beach and be warm and see all these beautiful people and work very, very hard for very deserving people.
But you didn't have time to go to the beach last time.
I did.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
But you do try to go to, so you come every single month?
Yes, ma'am.
That is dedication. So thank you for your dedication.
Thank you.
That's a lot. Appreciate that, though.
I'm blessed.
And then we also have, now you're co-counsel, right? And that Michael Hayden?
Yes.
And you're co-counsel.
Yep.
You live here in Long Beach?
No, I actually live in Carson.
Oh, well, that's a tough commute as well, depending on what
It's rough.
time you get on that
15
freeway.
minutes, 20 minutes. It's really hard, let me tell you.
Are you making sure Crystal gets to the beach, though?
I do. Well, I make sure she got from the airport today to work, so that's a start.
Okay, hey, that's the important part. Thank you again for joining. So I just kind of want to dive into everything we know about the case and maybe what you can touch on that we don't. So you were involved with the case up to the sentencing?
Yes. I joined the case in February of this year, and I don't do trial work. I've been trained just as appellate work. My history comes from civil rights, and I was working in the ADA area while I was going to law school, and so I was a national ADA expert and would go to different jurisdictions to consult different legal teams on civil rights. And then I had a friend of mine say, you know, if you can write a writ of mandamus or a writ of prohibition, you can do a writ of habeas. And so that's when I took a step over, to the right and joined criminal law and found Unite the People and just started doing the resentencing. And I know David Kenner, and and Cesar were talking, and, Tory's been involved with our firm, like you said, in the past. And so David said, well, let's see what, Crystal can see from Tory's transcripts. And so they brought me on a little early, even though I do appellate work. That way I could kind of help pad that record. So heaven forbid if we had to go here where we are today, that we would have the best trial record that we could. So that was really my role, but I wasn't in the forefront. I was very much in the back, just saying, please say this, because if we have to appeal, I would love for that to be in the record. And so
appellate work is can you explain to our listeners what appellate work is?
Yes. Unite the People, 99%. We do trial work at Unite the People, but mostly what we focus on is that post-conviction. So appellate work is both a direct appeal, but it's also other untraditional methods of appellate work. So where we get the resentencing or the writs of habeas, depending on what the circumstances and the people need. And sometimes with our older cases, especially, resentencing or habeas is the only hope that they have to get a legally just sentence.
Yeah, we're not relitigating. That's what people have to understand. We can't go back and rehash the facts and relitigate from the trial court because the media wants to say, what about the DNA? What about this? What about that? Well, we're going to address that on the appeal, but it's not the same as a new trial, if that makes sense.
It does. But I kind of want to circle back a little bit. I know you have another point you probably wanted to tackle, but when you say there were things that you said that you were like, hey, if we get to this point, I need to make sure that this is in there. Can you disclose any of those things that you kind of counseled people on and say, hey, you need to ask this question or you need to say this?
Yes, I did send in a pretty large memo just regarding all of the new assembly bills and Senate bills, for example. And so, Michael and I sat down and we looked and said, okay, we know what's passed and we know what's coming and maybe will pass. And so we made, a plan of the new areas that we could bring up. And I wanted to make sure that there were certain points of that in the record. There were certain points that have been filed under seal with, the conflict that came up. And so we wanted to make sure that that was, really put in the record well, because like Michael was saying, we can't relitigate the case. And so that was the great opportunity with Tory, is to come in early and make sure that we don't have to relitigate the case. Everything is in there. And so we're not trying to bring in anything, that wasn't already established. And that's the smartest way to do it. If you can do it that way, it's like a unicorn, though, because it doesn't always happen that way.
So, Michael, you said you made it a point to drive that home. You do not relitigate the case. So what happens in an appeal case?
Well, you have to point out errors of procedure, something that was flawed in the trial, something that was erroneous. You know, the trial court judge, the jury, they heard what they heard, they decided what they decided, and we can't change that. We can't undo that. We just have to point out procedural errors, abuse of discretion, if there was any. There's a lot of standards for the appeal. And then also drafting, that's mostly what I do. I do a lot of drafting. Real quick about me, I came on board with Unite the People on August 7th, ironically, at the exact same time as Tory's sentencing. And Cesar McDowell, he went with me, and Crystal welcomed me on board because I was an attorney that wasn't afraid to draft. Some attorneys don't like to draft. And before this, I was literally doing estate planning, which is basically contract law and drafting. Well, no one likes to draft, but
I like to draft.
Crystal likes to draft. I like to draft. In our firm, you have to be an attorney that likes to draft. I came from estate planning, which is essentially contract law and drafting. And that's why Cesar McDowell, the CEO, and Crystal felt that I would be a good fit, because I'm not an attorney that just expects a packet to be handed to him, walk in and litigate. I'm actually someone who drafts, and drafting is how you learn. And I drafted a bulk of the writ of habeas, which is not an appeal. It's actually something that allows us to work with these Senate bills and Assembly bills for resentencing. So if the appeal, anything goes awry with the appeal and they don't reverse on appeal, we still have a chance to do a writ of habeas that would reduce his sentencing depending on what we have to work with. Now, as Crystal was saying, we're hoping that these new bills go through that mandates a lower sentence. But as we have it now, for example, Senate Bill 620 allows discretionary, but not mandatory for the court to resentence to a lower sentence. So that's just one example. But we work with about a dozen things, and it's more than just a Google search away. You really have to know how these bills work. And Crystal has a little bit more experience, but I've been on a sharp learning curve, and it's been a nice journey. I love it.
Michael brought up a really good point, too, about the difference between a writ of habeas and a direct appeal. And so with a direct appeal, which is, what everyone traditionally knows as an appeal, that's, of course, what we've been retained to do at Tory, but we also have a writ. And a writ is a kind of appeal, but it's not the same kind of appeal. A writ is what we call extraordinary relief. And so I like to think of them as two buckets. And I call them inside and outside.
That's easy.
And yes. And basically, in the most simplest of terms, a direct appeal, I can argue everything that is in the record, but I cannot move outside of the record. But with a habeas, I can move outside of the record because that's where we can bring in these new Senate bills and these new Assembly bills and things like that. Usually aren't going to be in that record, except, like I said, in, our good friend Mr. Lanez's case, who brought some of us on a little early to make sure that everything, hope for the best and prepare the worst was basically what we were doing.
Plan A, plan B.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Always need both. So I want to ask a harder question, because when you're talking about Unite the People, this is about, making sure that people that don't have the money per se to get the proper legal advice, counsel, all of that good stuff, representation, they don't have that. Tory's not that person. He definitely had the means to make sure he had good legal counsel. And to be fair, I don't think he did himself any favors. There were things that he said on social media that went directly against what the court said, talking about the DNA when the court specifically said not to. He was very vocal at times when those who don't have an ounce of law could say, this is probably not a good idea. He didn't help himself in any way. So why would Unite the People take on this case from a man who is financially able to get a good attorney and had problematic
Well, he has a
statements
good
of his own?
attorney.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So he's not in one of those situations where he was over sentenced because he didn't have the proper funds to get proper representation, and he did things to make things harder for himself. Why would you pick up that case?
Well, we wanted to help, Tory for the same reason that we help everyone else. I told Tory, I really like you as a person, and I would be here whether you were Tory Lanez or Bob Smith, because at the end of the day, if there's, an illegal sentence that's racially biased, I believe this sentence is very salacious because of his celebrity, and so they wanted to come down hard because of that, and that's not fair. That's
We
not
got
our
to know
justice
him.
system.
We got to know him as a human when we went to visit him multiple times, and he's a great guy. And I would help him. I'm semi pop culture illiterate. At first, I said, "Who's Tory Lanez?" So that's my non-bias.
Did you say, who is Megan Thee Stallion too?
I don't know who she was either.
That's, at least you didn't know both. That's fair.
Law school do that to you.
Right? So that's fair. So with him though, it seems like you guys feel like he was over sentenced. So there was a moment in time where he had the opportunity to take 4 years. If he would have received that sentence, would you still think he was over sentenced?
Only if it was still in accordance to what the laws are today, because the law is ever changing. The law, I mean, I think this part of the law is the most fascinating piece. The patterns in the law follow our societal trends. So what's happening in California is we're changing from a philosophy of, having a harsh, punitive stance against crime, which now in hindsight we've learned just overcrowded our prisons, and we don't have people to fix our roads, and we don't have people to teach our children, and now we're taking a more rehabilitative stance. And so I would have been happy with that 4 years if I looked at that 4 years and it still met all of those little checkpoints. Then I would have said, okay, no big deal, it was fair. But if I looked at the 4 years and I said, wait a minute, AB 24, 124, he should have gotten a low term, not a midterm, and they gave him a midterm for that 4 years. So then I still would have come in, because I wouldn't be happy, because it's not the law.
Given what you know now, when the plea was offered, would you have advised him to take it?
I kind of want to lean towards no, for the simple fact that, like, I know what we have planned, and I know what we're, doing, and which road we're taking. And I think we have a pretty strong plan in place to, still give him, good help. And so I probably would have told him, that's actually why I love being an appellate attorney, and why I say, like, I don't like trials, because with the appeals, I get the beauty of hindsight. And so I get all these transcripts, and I get to read, and I get to think, and I get to look and see where all the errors are.
And not to rehash the facts or anything, but looking at this trial transcript in entirety, there's a lot of questionable areas. I mean, let's just leave it at that.
So I think we can address some of those, right? Because some of that had to be the DNA, and the fact that Tory Lanez DNA was not found on the magazine that would have loaded the bullets. Obviously, Megan Thee Stallion. Now, I will say this. I understand Megan Thee Stallion when she says, we were Black people, police showed up. There was no way I was going to say I had a gun in the car, because they are shooting Black people for much less than that. I 100% agree with her on that. And then she further said she didn't tell the female officer at the hospital because she was aggressive and combative with her. I still understand that. While I wish she would have handled that differently, I don't think our society at this time negates her point on not coming forward immediately. So there's obviously several problems in that situation. And I know as an attorney, you have one client. Your client is Tory Lanez. But when you're talking about a Black woman in this society being fearful, of her, at that time, by her own admission, she's not afraid of Tory. She's afraid of the police at that moment. And then coming out later, and then her being dragged through this social media mud as well. At what point do you say, okay, look, we know the facts of the case, we know your DNA was not there, but you were in the car, something happened regardless? So at what point do you say, we've got to take some sort of accountability with regards to what happened in that car? We can say there's two sides of the story, and maybe we don't have the full facts, but at what point do you as attorneys encourage accountability?
Well, I always tell my clients, I have some that maintain their innocence. And I have one in particular who tells me I was the closest Black man to a dead body in early 2000, post Rodney King, LA. And I firmly believe him. And so for me, I really feel that, I do feel sympathy for what she went through in this situation. I mean, regardless of the facts of, the story and what really happened, she was a victim, and it was traumatic for her. And so for that, I do feel bad. But I always tell the clients, that there's a way to, fight and still be a gentleman and maintain your innocence. And so that's what I try to hang on to, is show a little grace through the process, if that makes sense.
That was the fact that she was shot somehow by someone. But I mean, we really don't see a lot in the videos and the facts by the witnesses. I will say the driver not testifying, that's really strange. And I just never seen a case like this before. This is just it's a big shrouded mystery, and I really think that I can't make an opinion right now if the trial court got it right or got it wrong, but we're going to address all these issues in the appeal because there there was definitely more at play than meets the eye.
Do you get to do something like that in the appeal, like the driver not testifying? Do you get to circle back and say, no, we're going to subpoena you, you have to testify? Do you get to do that in an appeals case?
We would be able to do that if we did a resentencing, because that would be considered new evidence. That would be something that we could, possibly raise in the habeas. But because he didn't testify in the trial, that's not anything that we can touch in the direct appeal, because, again, it's the inside-outside buckets. And so if it's not inside the record, I can't put it in the direct appeal. But you can file both a direct appeal and a writ at the same time. And so that's why you would want to, take on an approach like that, because you would want to address something like that in a writ and say, that there was evidence that was, that could have exonerated him. And if we can get that, then that is something that we could raise in the habeas.
Okay. That was my question. So if something comes, because you clearly are probably going to still continue to do some sort of investigation. And if there is a fact that completely exonerates him, you have to be able to present that.
Yes. Yes. Like Michael was saying, we can't, traditionally, if we're talking about a very old case, we can't relitigate those facts because you've already done your direct appeal. And so the only thing that we can do is come in with either new law or new evidence. And those always open the door. So
I had read that part of it was something in regards to alcohol and drugs, and maybe he deserved rehab more than anything. He doesn't strike me as the type of person who struggles with that, though. Was that part of something that you wanted? Was let's get him help if he was drinking or if he in any drug state when this happened? Was that part of your plan going into before the sentencing?
Crystal, I believe weren't you third chair during the trial?
I
During
was.
yeah, it wasn't your plan. I personally wouldn't have went that way, but that's the way they went. And I read the 400 some pages of the transcript, and I would not say he has a problem like that, but that's something they made it into because that was one of the things they tried to push. And I just, like I said, hindsight's 2020. I just would not have went down that route.
That's a good point because you were third chair when you came on, and you didn't come on at the very beginning. So if there were things that you saw that lead counsel was doing that you didn't agree with, were you able to voice that?
I brought up my opinion, of course, but I'm not one to really kind of challenge and rock the boat. Like there were times where there were other people arguing, and I just was sitting in the corner doing my work, and somebody would say, "Hey, look at what Crystal's doing. Why are we arguing? Everybody get back to work," and if that is something that is your particular circumstance, then, we are going to ask for that in your case, and I do know that there are times where, in your celebrity, there is a lot of, the peer pressure to keep up the facade, and, there is the alcohol side and, the whole party lifestyle. And, so it would really come down to if Tory said, like, this is something I need help with, I would completely support that. And, if he said, I'm okay, I don't need to go to rehab, then I would say, okay, let's think of a different route then, so it just depends.
So now that you are lead counsel for the appeal, is there anything that you personally that you can speak about that was done during the trial that is making this an uphill battle for you?
I think just the fact of there is a lot of shroud and mystery around this. The full story didn't come out. I think a lot of people want to hear it. If I was able to say it, I would share with the world, but it's not ethically. I cannot say it, and it's not my story to share. And so that's one thing and I think really our justice system overall has kind of moved from a innocent until you're proven guilty to guilty and you have to prove you're innocent. And so I really find that, like, with not just Tory Lanez's case, but a lot of our cases, we're in an uphill battle because, you know, people's minds are already made up and then we have to go in and change their mind. And so that's kind of the struggle of it.
Especially like Tory with no prior bad record per se. They could bring up one prior bad act, you know, getting into a scuffle a few years ago. That's nothing more than a prior bad act. It's not
It's not a criminal
no,
act.
not technically even an arrest is not a criminal act until you're
Mhm.
proven guilty.
Do you think that his celebrity played into this, and that's why the sentencing was much harsher than you thought was warranted?
Yes, absolutely. I feel that there were some people on the case that really, you know, felt like, oh, good, then, you know, I'm going to get them, you know, and we're going to come down hard, and then, you know, perhaps it'll help their career and, you know, their name, and it is what it is. And
You are battling a billionaires club. That's all I can say about that.
From what you've learned about Tory, you talked about going to visiting him and just really liking him. Can you kind of share who Tory Lanez the person is to you? Michael, I'm going to start with you.
When I first met him, I went to go have him sign our retainer for Unite the People, and he seemed really down. He seemed really sad. He just been in for I think a couple weeks at that time, and he didn't know me. I didn't know him. It was kind of a quick exchange. I mentioned Crystal, and he kind of lit up a little bit and said, "Oh, tell Crystal I said hi. I really like Crystal." And then the second time we both went to go visit, we sat and we were supposed to spend maybe a solid hour. We must have sat for 3, 4 hours and talked. You know, good timing too because we're usually there like 1 to 4, 1 to 5, kind of, you know, not interfering with chow time or whatever. But you know, we would just talk and formulate, you know, plans, ideas, and he would just talk to us about his family and about you know, just Crystal probably has more to say, but yeah, he's overall he's a human and he's a great person, and you know, I just think that you know, like I said, there's a lot of factors at play, and maybe, you know, the media, his celebrity status, everything just got the best of him. But I don't, you know, there's 2 or 3 or 4 different hypotheses of what happened in that car that night, and you know, I can't, like Crystal said, it's not my place to say, you know, it's not my place to relitigate it. Um, but it's definitely a good possibility, you know, that you know, Tory's he's a stand-up guy and he's being truthful. So
that's actually what I was going to say is, like, immediately it just struck me as how honest and genuine of a human being he is, which is rare to find in any person, celebrity, non-celebrity, just somebody who is really themselves and isn't afraid to be themselves. And I find that just refreshing, you know, in our society today. And I liked how dedicated he was to his family, to his dad, to his siblings, to his son, and to his, you know, new wife. And I just really like enjoy them as people. And you know, I hate to see any person that, especially somebody that has actually such strong morals, considering what he's facing, you know, to be in this situation. I really feel that it was a case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And I do hope that, you know, once all this is said and done, that everybody will know what really happened.
No, I thank you guys both so much because I think, as far as you know, I obviously as a reporter, I do news, but I also do entertainment and sports as well. So obviously, I've been following this case, and it's interesting to me how much the court of public opinion has evolved. You know, that was just kind of a term back in the day, but now it's literally. I wonder if that, in your opinion, I know with Tory or anyone else, especially when you're a celebrity, once the court of public opinion gets involved, is it possible to truly have a fair trial?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that's actually something that I've been kind of contemplating about through this trial is like it was really held in the public eye. And I feel that, you know, everybody, I mean, I don't have any proof, so I can't definitively say, but just kind of putting my shoes, or, putting myself in the shoes of those jurors, did they not look?
It'd be impossible.
Yeah.
You'd have to stay completely off social media.
Yeah, I don't have any proof of that, but it was just such a big case. And so I've wondered that myself. Just, were we, was it decided before it was decided?
I'd have to agree. I mean, it's definitely, times have changed the last 20 years. Everything's evolved. Everything's a click away or a touch away. And I mean, if anybody on the jury were to happen to look at something, even though they were told not to, that would throw the whole thing off.
Thank you guys both so much for coming on and explaining this. We're going to obviously follow this, probably going to have you back on, maybe give us an update. I thank you guys so much. And we're definitely friends with Unite the People and appreciate your work that you do there for the underserved in our communities, not just in Long Beach, but throughout California. I really appreciate you guys both for coming on. Thank you so much to Crystal Morgan and Michael Hayden for joining us on this week's episode of The Word with Jackie Ray. I know a lot of you are following this case closely, so we are going to do a 2-part series. Next week, I will have Megan Kniff joining us on the show. She's going to talk about her coverage, her interpretation of the facts, and what we can expect next. Once again, I'm Jackie Ray. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, if you have to speak a word, make it a good one. We'll see you next time.